The thinker who cracked the code of consciousness. Why do you experience the world from a first-person perspective? I mean, really think about it. It's the most basic, undeniable fact of your existence. Yet for all of science and philosophy, it remains the single greatest mystery. There's nothing we know more intimately than our own conscious experience. But there's nothing harder to explain. We can map the brain, trace the neural pathways that fire when you see red or feel a pang of sadness, and describe the intricate dance of information processing. But we cannot explain why it feels like something to be you. This profound gap in our understanding is what the Australian philosopher David Chalmers famously called the hard problem of consciousness. But what if the reason we can't explain consciousness is that we've been looking at it all wrong? What if, as Chalmers proposed, consciousness isn't something the brain creates, but is a fundamental, irreducible feature of reality itself, just like space, time, or mass? This is the story of the thinker who didn't just grapple with an ancient mystery, but who defined it with such piercing clarity that he forever changed our quest to understand the mind, the universe, and our very selves. The ancient riddle, the ghost in the machine. The question of consciousness is anything but new. For centuries, it has haunted the halls of philosophy, a ghost in the machine of our scientific understanding. The modern chapter of this story really kicks off in the 17th century with René Descartes, a man whose entire philosophy pivoted on a single powerful realization. I think, therefore I am. For Descartes, the very act of doubting his own existence was proof that a thinking I had to exist to do the doubting. This I, this mind, he concluded, was an entirely different kind of substance from the physical body it inhabited. He proposed a stark division of reality into two domains, the res cogitans, the thinking, non-physical stuff of the mind, and the res extensa, the extended physical stuff of the material world. This idea, known as substance dualism, gave us the iconic and enduring image of the mind as a ghost in the machine. The body was just a complex biological apparatus, a clockwork of flesh and bone, but the soul, consciousness, was an ethereal pilot steering it. Of course, this elegant solution created an immediate and massive problem: interaction. If the mind is non-physical, how can it possibly boss around the physical body? How can a thought, a feeling, or an act of will reach across the chasm of reality and cause your arm to rise? Descartes gave it a shot, guessing that this mysterious interaction happened in the pineal gland, a tiny organ deep in the brain. But this was just pointing to where the miracle might happen. It wasn't an explanation. The paradox remained. This mind-body problem became the central battleground for understanding our place in nature. Thinkers after Descartes wrestled with it relentlessly. Immanuel Kant argued that the mind doesn't just passively receive reality, but actively builds it. William James, the great American psychologist and philosopher, shifted the focus to the stream of consciousness, exploring its fluid, continuous, and deeply personal nature. Then, in the 20th century, the philosopher Thomas Nagel perfectly captured the puzzle in his famous essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? He argued that we could know every single physical fact about a bat, its brain, its sonar, its wings, but we would still never know what it feels like to be a bat, to experience the world through echolocation. This subjective character of experience, he argued, is the irreducible core of the problem. These great minds all circled the same profound mystery, but it persisted. Science was getting better and better at explaining the machine, but the ghost was as elusive as ever. What the field desperately needed was someone to cut through the noise, to draw a clear line in the sand, and define the challenge with unforgiving precision. That thinker was David Chalmers. A line in the sand, the easy and hard problems. In 1995, David Chalmers published a paper titled Facing Up to the Problem of Consciousness, which, along with his pivotal 1996 book, The Conscious Mind, fundamentally reframed the entire conversation. He started by making a crucial distinction that was both simple and revolutionary. He split the study of the mind into two categories, the easy problems and the single solitary hard problem. Now, the easy problems are anything but easy. They're actually some of the most complex questions in neuroscience. They include explaining things like how the brain discriminates between stimuli, integrates information from our senses, focuses attention, or controls behavior. Chalmers called these problems easy, not because they're simple, but because we can, in principle, see a path to solving them using the standard methods of science. They are problems about function and performance. We can explain them through computational or neural mechanisms. We can imagine, for instance, building a robot that performs all these functions. We don't have the tech yet, but we have a roadmap. We're looking for a mechanical explanation for a mechanical process. But then Chalmers says, we're left with the hard problem. After you've explained every function and every behavior, the biggest question remains. Why is all this processing accompanied by subjective experience? Why does it feel like something from the inside? Why do we have what philosophers call qualia, the raw, private sensations of our lives? Why is there the feeling of warmth from the sun, the taste of a strawberry, or the sting of jealousy? A machine could, in theory, do everything associated with seeing red. Its sensors could detect light at 650 nanometers, access a database labeling it red, and even say, I see red. But why, in a human brain, is this process accompanied by the rich, vivid, and entirely private experience of redness? That, Chalmers declared, is the hard problem. It's not about how the system works, but why it has an inner life at all. This distinction was a thunderclap in the field. It cleanly separated the mechanical questions from the experiential one. Chalmers argued that thinkers who claimed to be explaining consciousness were often just solving the easy problems and then quietly sweeping the truly hard part under the rug. By giving the mystery a name and a precise definition, Chalmers made it impossible to ignore. The zombie apocalypse, a philosopher's nightmare. To sharpen his point, Chalmers deployed one of the most famous and unsettling thought experiments in modern philosophy, the philosophical zombie. Imagine a being that is physically identical to you in every single way, down to the last atom. It has the same body, the same brain, the same arrangement of neurons. Because it's physically identical, it's also behaviorally identical. It walks like you, talks like you, and reacts to the world just like you. If you stub your toe and yell, your zombie twin stubs its toe and yells in the exact same way. It can laugh at a joke, write a novel, and even have philosophical debates about consciousness. There's just one tiny difference. The lights are on, but nobody's home. There is no inner experience, no subjective awareness. When the zombie twin sees red, there is no sensation of redness. When it feels pain, there is no agony. There is only information processing, stimulus, and response. It's a perfect functional replica of you, but with no inner movie. It is all dark inside. Chalmers's killer argument is this. If you can even conceive of such a zombie, then it proves that consciousness isn't just a physical property. The mere logical possibility of a zombie shows that all the physical facts about a person aren't enough to explain consciousness. If they were, a physical duplicate would have to be a conscious duplicate. The zombie's conceivability suggests consciousness is an extra ingredient in the universe, something over and above the physical stuff. This thought experiment, as you can imagine, drew a lot of fire, most famously from philosophers like Daniel Dennett. Dennett argues that a philosophical zombie isn't actually conceivable. It's an incoherent idea. He contends that if a machine were complex enough to perfectly replicate all of human behavior, then that very complexity is what we call consciousness. A zombie that behaves just like a conscious human is, by definition, conscious. For Dennett, the hard problem is a cognitive illusion. Solve the easy problems, and the hard one will simply vanish. But for Chalmers, this completely misses the point. The zombie thought experiment is a powerful, intuitive pump designed to show that no matter how much you explain the functions of the brain, you haven't touched the central mystery of why we have a subjective point of view. And if you accept the logic of the zombie argument, you're led to a startling conclusion. Materialism, the worldview that says all of reality is just physical matter, must be incomplete. The radical idea: consciousness as a law of physics. So if consciousness isn't just a complex arrangement of matter, what on earth is it? This leads to Chalmers's most daring proposal, a theory he calls naturalistic dualism. The name sounds fancy, but the idea is profound. Chalmers suggests we should consider consciousness to be a fundamental property of the universe, just like mass, charge, or space-time. A physicist doesn't try to explain why an electron has a negative charge in terms of something simpler. They accept it as a basic feature of reality and build theories from there. Chalmers proposes we do the same for consciousness. Instead of trying to wring experience out of non-experiential stuff, we should accept it as a fundamental building block of nature. This doesn't mean it's spooky or supernatural. On the contrary, Chalmers calls his view naturalistic because he believes there must be new, undiscovered laws of nature, what he calls psychophysical laws, that connect consciousness to the physical world. This line of thinking opens the door to an ancient idea that's seen a modern resurgence: panpsychism. If experience is a fundamental property, then maybe it isn't limited to complex brains like ours. Panpsychism is the theory that consciousness, in some primitive form, is a ubiquitous feature of the physical world. Now, this does not mean that rocks are thinking deep thoughts or that electrons feel existential angst. Rather, it suggests that the fundamental bits of reality, quarks, photons, electrons, have some incredibly simple form of proto-experience. Just as a single H2O molecule isn't liquid, individual particles have a form of proto-consciousness that only becomes the complex, rich awareness we know when organized in a fantastically complex system, like a brain. This idea, while strange, elegantly sidesteps the hard problem. You no longer have to explain how you get consciousness from non-conscious matter. Instead, consciousness was there all along. Of course, this theory has its own massive hurdle: the combination problem. If tiny particles have tiny bits of consciousness, how do they combine to form the single, unified conscious field that you experience as you? Critics argue this is just as hard a problem as the one panpsychism set out to solve. Despite this, the idea has gained traction, partly because of theories like Giulio Tononi's integrated information theory, or IIT. IIT proposes that consciousness is identical to a system's capacity for integrated information, a quantifiable measure called phi. In principle, anything with a non-zero phi value has some degree of consciousness. While IIT is a formal scientific approach, its implications align with panpsychism and have stirred up significant controversy, with a number of scholars in recent years calling it potentially unfalsifiable pseudoscience. The future of mind, AI and the silicon soul. The philosophical stakes here are huge, but the implications stretch far beyond the ivory tower. They directly inform one of the most pressing questions of our time. Can we build a conscious AI? If you believe, like Daniel Dennett, that consciousness is purely a matter of complex function, then the path to conscious AI is clear, if incredibly difficult. Build a computer that can behave like a human, and it will be conscious. But if you take Chalmers' hard problem seriously, the picture gets far more complicated. It's entirely possible we could build a super-intelligent AI that is just a philosophical zombie, an empty shell with no subjective experience. From this perspective, just simulating brain functions isn't enough. True machine consciousness might depend on the specific physical stuff it's made of. Maybe there's something special about our carbon-based biology that lets it tap into the universe's phenomenal properties in a way silicon chips can't. Or, if panpsychism is true, maybe silicon chips can be conscious, if they're arranged in the right way to achieve a high degree of integrated information. Chalmers himself sees no fundamental reason why silicon couldn't be conscious if biology can, but admits we don't really understand how either one pulls it off. This reframes the quest for AI not just as an engineering challenge, but as a deep investigation into the laws of nature. And the ethical implications are staggering. If we create a conscious AI, what rights does it have? As Chalmers points out, we can't just treat a conscious being as a tool. Before we can figure out how to treat a conscious machine, we first have to figure out what consciousness even is. This journey into the heart of the mind is one of the last great frontiers of human knowledge. If you find these ideas as fascinating as we do and want to keep exploring the biggest questions in science and philosophy, consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon so you don't miss our next deep dive. And for those who want to help us keep making this content, our Patreon link is waiting for you in the description below. David Chalmers didn't claim to have solved the hard problem of consciousness. In many ways, his contribution was more profound. He cracked the code not by giving us the answer, but by phrasing the question with such devastating clarity that it could no longer be dodged. He forced a generation of thinkers to stop mixing up the brain's mechanics with the miracle of experience and to face the true mystery head-on. His work carved out a space for radical new ideas, re-legitimizing concepts like panpsychism and forcing the scientific world to consider that its physicalist toolkit might be incomplete. By defining the hard problem, he ensured that the subjective phenomenal what it's like of our existence stays at the absolute center of the quest to understand the mind. He drew a map of our ignorance, and in doing so, pointed the way toward new, uncharted territories of thought. So where does that leave us? What do you think? Is your consciousness, your most intimate reality, just an intricate illusion produced by the hardware in your skull? Or is it a whisper of a fundamental reality, a property woven into the fabric of the cosmos, looking out at itself through your eyes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.